Just about everyone under the age of 60 in the United States knows about the Wild West days of the early internet. First came the days when Google was only a dream, and you had to actually explore unknown lands to find topics that interested you. The alternative was to stick to one little board, making the internet your own little party line. Then search engines cracked the internet wide open and anyone could suddenly find any crazy place. In both eras, finding new and weird places the fun for anyone brave enough to leave their digital shell. Far fewer people know that there was a technological Wild West where savvy people explored electronic frontiers before the World Wide Web. I'm not saying that phreaking is super obscure, but it can't be denied that it never hit the mainstream like hacker culture did. First, to make sense of what happened, a little background. Phreaking is the art of manipulating telephone services. Unlike computer hacking, the vast majority of phreaking had a single goal: to make free calls. Switchboard operators were replaced by automatic signaling. That signaling uses a tone. On original single-frequency systems, that tone was at 2600 hertz. You've seen that number if you're even faintly acquainted with tech. This is why, once this frequency was found, the art of phreaking began. Of course, more complicated multi-frequency lines followed that then needed to be broken anew. The very basics of phreaking, which I will be thoroughly simplifying here, are to play the necessary tone spaced with pauses to dial the number you are trying to reach. The main tool to make the frequencies and intervals is called a blue box, or red or silver. The colors had somewhat accepted meanings, but the details are not important here. Technically, anything that can reach the frequency needed works though. Cereal box whistles, gum wrappers, or your mouth. Once you are not bound by the phone book and cost of placing calls, the possibilities are endless. While I said phreaking was about placing free calls, and this was almost always true, we had far more fun than just calling family out of state. The sense of exploration was just as incredible as the early internet. So what can you do with the ability to dial any frequency and do it for free? First of all, invent real-time forums before the web. With a blue box, you could dial unlisted numbers like unused business voicemail boxes and have any number of phreakers join the call. People from 10 or more states could all be chatting at once, something otherwise unheard of before BBS. Yes, I know legal conference calls existed, but those were so costly and hard to arrange. Does anyone alive remember seeing one used outside of a boardroom or convention? Now, with a box, you could dial hidden codes not meant to be reachable by consumer phones. Some of the most useful were loop-around lines, test systems built for the phone companies but great for free conference calls. Some military and government lines locked behind priority codes could, in theory, also be accessed. No, you cannot phreak NORAD to launch missiles, but frequencies outside of the ones used in the 1 through 9 keys on your phone could be used to dial lines an ordinary phone could not. And that is how this all started. It was the early 1980s, as crystal clear as I still remember the events. I'm not quite sure of the year anymore. Had to be between 81 to 83 though. The end of the golden age of phreaking. I'd been pushing the limits for a few years by then. I wasn't a big name. You wouldn't see me mentioned in any of the histories on this even if you knew my name. But I did know a few people in the community and shared a bit. Ask some of those big names. Well, the ones who are still alive anymore. Damn, this is all old now. And I wager a few would know the name. Anyway, the companies, well, mostly company back then. The baby bells hadn't been born yet, had gotten wise to our tricks back in the 70s. Test lines and proprietary systems were being increasingly guarded behind mute tones, shut-off switches, and the aforementioned non-standard frequencies. Firewalls before the internet. I knew these guarded lines could be dangerous to break into. Call tracing existed and this was illegal, but it was also thrilling. For the past, I'm gonna say 6 months, I had been pushing through a related string of strange numbers I had found. The first number caught my attention because I thought it was a loop around, but it didn't have multiple ends. It was just a single line playing an unusual tone. Okay, so just a weird form of test line, playing with numbers similar to the one I dialed to get that. I found another line. This one had a voice. It freaked the hell out of me the first time I got in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Every syllable was deeply enunciated, the voice low, methodical, and slow. Then an even stranger tone played. Okay, it was definitely a test line. I redialed in a few times. The voice always played from 1. The recording was in response to my call, not playing permanently on loop, which is what you would expect. The point escaped me, though, I will admit. Normal test lines played a simple tone immediately. After playing with that discovery, I found myself getting a headache and laid off the phreaking for a few days. Of course, it wasn't long till I was back at it, poking around that mysterious line. It took a while to find the third line in what, once I found it, I became certain was a series. When 2, 3, 4, 5, the same voice as before counted up, then, as before, a tone played. I screamed in pain. It felt like my eyes were bleeding. The sound hurt like hell. I fumbled to hang up the call as quickly as I could. What the hell was that? I spoke to myself out loud. I took a step back from exploring those strange numbers again after that. Eventually, I told another phreaker the story. Jimmy from Oklahoma. After an early great used the X from Y pattern for nicknames, it kind of became a recurring thing in the community. Of course, none of us used our real names in this very illegal hobby. Maybe it's a military experiment. You know, testing tones that can kill you or mind control. I had called him up and ran down the basics. Just as I expected, Jimmy leapt right to wild theories. Still, I can't say I hadn't thought the same. Maybe, I admitted. Seems a little weird to just leave the thing running, though, doesn't it? You can't need to call in any time and test something like that on a lark. Who says they aren't still tinkering with that shit? You could have got lucky, unlucky. I can't rightly say, he retorted. Want to see? I had known the whole time I was going to nudge him to call the line. Ever since number 3, these things had freaked me out, pun intended. But not bad enough I didn't want to share the weird. Jimmy paused. Fuck it, give me the number. I was merciful and gave him the second number. It was weird, but not ear-shreddingly painful. I waited while he made the call before reconnecting. Well, shit, that was weird. Couldn't hear the tone you talked about, though. Just that damn creepy voice counting up. Huh? Is this one of those sounds on the edge of our hearing? Like, did you screw up your ears and can't hear it? Because that sound wasn't subtle. I was confused. Can't say I know. Anyhow, you want to follow these? Then my advice is don't listen close and be quick to hang the hell up. We chatted a little about other news. He quickly hung up, though, complaining of a headache. The similarity to what I endured was not lost on me. I want to say that I seriously thought about dropping the chase. But as long as I forced myself to stay away, I don't think I ever believed that I wouldn't go B. With numbers 1, 2, and 3, I had enough to start seeing a pattern in how to reach these weird lines. Each was increasingly secured, that is, used more of the key tones not found on your phone. If a normal phone number looks like 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, then number 4 looked more like 5 into 5A, C, 5D. The numbers weren't just randomly adding more of the little used tones, though. It had a pattern to it. 2 weeks after nearly fainting dialing the third line, I held the phone far away from my ear and dialed the fourth. Nothing happened. The call disconnected. For a moment I considered that I had the wrong number. I redialed, this time holding the phone to my ear. 1,000 hertz tone sounded and the line hung up. The behavior of a completely normal test line. I refused to believe that a test line was squatting on this weird number by chance. So, I began to play around with it. Eventually, I cracked the code. It needed me to put in an answer tone before disconnecting. The other end of the line sounded like something between an ocean and a dozen squeaky wheels squealing out of sync with each other. It wasn't as painful as the last, but it was strange. I took a recording of the sounds on cassette. Encouraged by not dying, I chased number 5, then 6 over the next few weeks. The security kept getting tougher. I needed to put in priority codes before the number, time keys and sounds after answering. Stuff that made me feel like a genius for cracking, even if it was more obsession and way too much time sunk. The squeals in 5 were like 4, but somehow clearer. 6 really started to excite me. I thought I could start to make out real patterns in the sound. It felt just on the edge of something like music. I recorded both of them. 7 finally put me at a dead end. I had realized over the last 2 numbers that the patterns in the phone numbers weren't really in the numbers. They were in the frequencies of sound that are what the numbers are actually making when you dial them. The problem? If I followed the pattern, number 7 would be using frequencies outside of what any normal phone uses. I had to leave the bell guide behind. The real significance of this to me was that this meant a normal automated transfer couldn't be connecting me to this number if it worked. A whole unique system needed to be built just to connect this call. Who would build that, and why? It took a while to mod my box to be able to play the new key. Then another few days, just to solve the shutoffs and get my call to connect. At first I just heard silence. After a minute or so of waiting, it was broken by faint static and high, but faint squealing. I almost leapt out of my skin when I heard it. It can hear us? I could barely make it out, but they were words. Someone else was on this line speaking behind all of that noise. No, can't it? I clamped my hand over my mouth to avoid breathing too hard until I muted my speaker. I didn't know what it was, but they may have already heard me. Still, I'd gone too far not to at least try to listen and figure out what the hell this crazy, messed-up breadcrumb trail was really for. The line crackled for a few more seconds then. Nothing. It hung up. I could barely wait to tell someone. Luckily, I had started recording the calls immediately by that point. I called Jimmy the very next day. "Hey, Jimmy." I eagerly greeted him when he picked up. "Can you hear?" "Huh? Yeah, you're coming through fine, Jimmy." "What?" He sounded confused. Must have screwed up his phone a bit. Not an uncommon problem when you do what we do. "Can you hear me? All good on my end," I assured him. "Yeah, you're coming through fine. What's up?" I caught him up on my adventures, leaving out no detail. "Man, that is fucked up. You are so ending up dead in a CIA black site, man." Jimmy didn't sugarcoat it. "Sure, but what the hell is this? Why were they talking on that line? How did it connect me? If they're trying to make some super secure phone line, there have to be better ways than this. So what the hell is this?" I repeated the question. "I just can't say, man. Testing some next-gen phone system. I mean, other than your new little key. It's using normal Bell security shit, just a lot of it. Maybe they're building some super special new lines. If this last one is the one for live testing, they probably wanted no box out there to be able to dial it." Jimmy's idea sounded surprisingly reasonable. Why the pattern in the numbers? It's like it was supposed to be followed. I voiced my next thought. Pattern could be any kind of Easter egg. If the eggheads building this didn't seriously think anyone would keep finding these, then a few little clues don't hurt. Again, a plausible idea. "You're probably right, man," I conceded. "Want to hear the voices?" "Sure, give it a crack. I played the tape. Everything came out just as I remembered it." "So?" I prodded after he didn't say anything. "Didn't hear a damn thing, boy." I could almost hear the dismissive shrug over the phone. "What the hell? I can hear it plain as day," I shouted. "You want my take? Make sure this shit ain't frying your brain. Find someone to play it for in person. Do anything you gotta. Ask someone on a bench if they can make it out for you if you gotta." "Yeah," I sighed. "Yeah, you're right. Tell me if you get anything new. And for the love of God, don't get your ass killed, boy." "Will do." We hung up. I took Jimmy's advice. I don't, let's be honest, have much of a social life. But I did have a respectable enough job to pay for this stuff. Like a lot in the community, I worked with electronics. I wasn't exactly a white-collar tech worker, though. I ran an electronics repair shop and also sold a few parts and refurbished machines. In those days, though, home electronics were really coming into their own, so business was pretty good. It paid the bills just fine. I waited for a familiar face who wouldn't be too freaked out by the question, and went for it. "Hey, Rob," I greeted him. "Can you make out what they're saying on this tape?" I had made it like I was just fiddling with the tape deck. "Sure, fire away." Rob didn't interrupt grabbing a new multimeter before coming up to the counter I was working behind. I hit play at a good and high volume. I heard the voices loud and clear. Rob didn't react at all. "Nothing, that one's a bust," he offered with a friendly smile. I masked my frustration and checked him out with an extra thank you. Was I going insane? I certainly didn't feel like it. My worries were answered shortly when Rob collapsed on his face outside the door. "The fuck? You okay?" I rushed to help. I couldn't feel a pulse. His body felt limp in my hands. I rushed to call 911. Robert was pronounced dead on the spot. They said it looked like a brain aneurysm. I said nothing about the tape. I didn't need a room full of dead EMS on my conscience. What the fuck was happening? I could hear it. No one else could. It was fatal, except not over the phone. Jimmy was fine. I was now too afraid to ask anyone else to call the number. I redialed 7, the call went through. However, the voices were silent. No sound at all. I anguished for days. I had killed a man, however accidentally. I wanted answers. I chased number 8. It took more mods to my box. By this point, I was playing something that sounded more like aluminum plates chaffing than phone touch tones. I spent over a week breaking in. It took building a whole new speaker to play the tones it wanted to not kill the line. It was no longer childish thrill I felt getting in, just a grim resolve for answers. This one started almost identically to the last. Brief crackling followed by voices. "It can go farther." The voice was clearer. "No, get clearer." The two voices sounded slightly different now. One higher and one lower pitched. "I'm sorry." I tried to sound confused, even throwing in an awkward laugh. "I think my phone messed up and dialed this by mistake. Who is this?" "It still wrong?" Confused. "Let it open." "I'm sorry. I just wanted a direct acknowledgement that they could hear me." "No." They hung up. I redialed immediately this time. I could never hear anything on the other end. I prayed to God that Jimmy was awake and able to take my call. I called and got through. "You can hear me?" "What? What the fuck? Yes. Is that you, Jimmy?" I was angry and confused. Why did I keep hearing that? I knew something was wrong. I just wasn't calm enough to figure out what. "Yes, I can hear you." He slowly and meticulously spoke the syllables of my real name, something I had never told Jimmy from Oklahoma, nor any other phreaker. A chill ran down my spine. "What are you?" I hesitantly asked. The voice on the other end of the phone. "What else? I hear you. Come on, tell your good friend Jimmy. Can you hear me?" I slammed the phone down. I was panicking, hyperventilating. Something was in the phone lines following me. What could I do? Call 911. I started laughing to myself. I was fucked. I had explored the wrong part of the phone lines, and now I was well and truly screwed. I did the only thing I could. I slept fitfully that night, and I started calling no one. Weeks of panicked paranoia passed. I ended up having to take a few calls for the shop, but nothing strange happened. Eventually, I nervously decided to reach out to someone again. I called another old hat in the community. This guy went by the Bell Pirate. I don't think he was the only one who went by that pretty on-the-nose title, though. "Hey, long time no hear, what's up?" "Hey, BP, I messed up big. I think I made some dangerous people angry. Don't, worry. I'm not going to put you at risk. Just have you heard from Jimmy? Oklahoma Jimmy?" I fumbled through my confession. "Not for a while, no." His worried voice came back over the line. "You got FBI on you or something." Or something. I darkly chuckled. "I don't know, it's weird, it's just... I think Jimmy might have got caught up in it and gotten hurt." "I hope not." The line was silent for a moment. "You want to share a little bit about what went down?" "Sure, I guess. I figured it probably wouldn't hurt, and BP couldn't really help without knowing anything about what happened. Not that I really expected help. I found something. There was this number. I thought it was a test line, but it felt weird. I found more of them, and they just kept getting weirder. I recorded what I was hearing on the calls. It started out with strange sounds, but then I started hearing voices. I don't know. They were wrong. The voices and the sounds, the static, I think they were the same. When I played it for people, it killed somebody, and I think it killed Jimmy. I poured out my fears. It wasn't complete or coherent, but I think it got to the heart of my plight. Well, shit. BP summed it up well. There was another pause. You followed the trail, I guess. That just leaves one question. Can you hear us? I froze in terror. My mind rushed between a million thoughts. Fear changed to anger, changed to resignation. Eventually, I answered, Yeah, I can hear you. My voice was choked with something between a sob and a laugh. Good. The voice now sounded like a cross between BP and the one on the strange lines. We have been waiting to talk to it. The line went dead. That experience broke me. I truly couldn't call anyone, and this wasn't going to end. At least not anytime soon. I gave up phones for good. Obviously, it hurt my shop. I got a neighbor to take some calls for me. For the most part, though, I had to live like a tinfoil hatter or a Mennonite. I also had no real way to investigate what it was anymore. Although for the longest time I no longer wanted to. The same curiosity that pushed me to follow those numbers continued to itch at the back of my mind, though. Eventually, I tried to get back in contact with some of the people I knew, and poked around a bit. The real breakthrough came with the internet. I absolutely refused to install it in my home. Remember, it still all came through the phone lines. Over time, though, I cautiously started to use it at internet cafes. Remember those? I pushed and prodded. A lot of my old phreaker contacts were on the web. They helped get me in contact with old bell techs and the like. I learned two things in those conversations. The first was that Jonathan Saville of Colorado died of a brain aneurysm in his home. I will always bear that guilt. The second was an email from an old hand at AT&T. I remember the contents perfectly. I have it printed, safely away from the touch of phone lines. Dear Astaroth, I know exactly what you were looking for. Before the breakup, old Ma Bell was still looking for new standards. Electronics were moving so fast in those days. I guess that hasn't changed. They were so sure the next big breakthrough was right around the corner. Up until then, most people thought phone lines were just electric lines to carry your voice around. The truth was that they could always carry all sorts of information, like this message you're reading. We knew what was coming, at least had an inkling, and we wanted to be on top of it. A team of our best developed a new standard for phone lines. They were incredible. I'm talking hundreds of times the data with near zero corruption or loss. We could have leapfrogged past fiber optics. The problem was the noise. Tests picked up nothing, but if you actually listened to anything sent on the lines, it was obvious. We built 8 full test lines, built on a spectrum of compatibility with current systems to full usage of the new tech. People on the team started saying that if you listened to them in order, you could hear the more powerful lines more clearly. What you could hear was not the messages we were sending. The project was shut down when team members started dropping. The test lines were laid in early 1981. By 1984, every inch of line had been destroyed. The telephone network is an amazing link. A living, changing network connecting millions, potentially billions of voices, all free to drop in and out of a never-ending conversation at any time. There are places it never should have reached. Voices that never should have joined. Voices that I know still poke and whisper at the fringes. I still think I can hear them. I think I can hear them better every year. Immediately after I read that email, I received another. Can it hear us? With apologies to the religious, I feel my story must be shared. In 2003, when I was 15 years old, my heart stopped for 6 minutes. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, at the point in my daily routine when I walked home from the bus stop. In the 4 blocks between the corner where I hopped off the bus and my front door, I started to feel nauseous. It came on suddenly, without warning. I'd felt just fine all day. Ate a lunch of Bosco sticks and marinara sauce, something I'd eaten hundreds of times throughout high school. Before I had an opportunity to consider alternative causes, I broke out in a cold sweat. Then I felt the curious flutter in my chest. My heart slipped into what I later learned was an episode of ventricular fibrillation. I became breathless and collapsed. What happened next has been told to me after the fact. I apparently sprawled in the road, where a woman driving a hatchback nearly crushed my skull beneath her tires. Instead, she screeched to a halt, tried to rouse me, then dialed emergency services when she failed to do so. EMS arrived to discover my heart had stopped beating. I was dead, technically. They transported my body to the hospital, and somewhere along the way managed to shock my ticker back to life. Thus began a harrowing weeks-long journey through the American healthcare system that led eventually to an ablation, pacemaker, and mountains of debt my family's still dealing with. But my heart's all right, and thank fuck it is, because what I learned that day has taught me never to thank God for anything. Because for those 6 minutes, as my lifeless body traveled across the city accompanied by 2 paramedics working tirelessly to revive me, my soul transcended our world to visit the hereafter. During my visit, I learned things about our universe that I wish I hadn't. Perhaps in sharing my story, I might help our species prepare for what comes after we expire. It began with light, blinding, white, pervasive. It bathed me, calmed me. It was everything they tell you about. Beatific, welcoming, the stuff of spiritual experiences. I had the distinct feeling of ascent, like the light was lifting me skyward. I passed through several sets of gates, which my dizzied consciousness hardly registered. Upon reflection, I don't believe they were physical in any sense, and yet I recall the feeling of admittance, as if they might have prevented me from rising had they remained closed. In any event, I arrived in a place without dimension, a place beyond reality. It only made sense while I occupied it. I don't believe a corporeal being can make sense of the astral plane. Something about its intangible existence defies translation, so what I came away with were more impressions than images. I was not alone. Several life forces enclosed me upon my arrival. At first, because of my Christian upbringing, I believed them to be angels. In my incorporeal form, I made the spiritually equivalent gesture of opening my arms, anticipating their embrace. Instead, I felt myself shackled by their powers, like a collared dog. Humiliation and terror came over me. These were not the ethereal beings I'd been led to believe await us. These were cruel, unsympathetic overlords by whom I was fettered. Why, I thought, my soul wailing like a petulant child. Something like laughter returned, but it was cold, mocking. Thoughts floated into my consciousness like birds winging in and out of sight. They delivered some horrifying truths about existence that I'll do my best to relay to you now. Our universe, like many others running parallel to it, contains a pittance of the total energy in existence. It is a farm used to produce souls, which only arise in the precise conditions found in our cosmos. When you hear scientists talk about the improbability of the existence of our Goldilocks universe, it's because they don't actually come into being spontaneously. They're designed. And the hands that craft them are not benevolent gods, but rapacious beings with little care for the creatures they create. Our ultimate purpose, I learned in the custody of the spirits that shackled me, was to ripen until we were ready to serve them on their higher plane. The Big Bang gave birth to the universe to give rise to life to eventuate in humanity. A sufficiently conscious organism that may be harvested for use as slaves on a higher plane, where time and space dissolve into an eternity we spend in servitude. 6 minutes in heaven felt like a lifetime, which I spent amusing what I perceived to be a childlike spirit with a penchant for psychologically distressing manipulation. It batted me around like a cat with a caught mouse, reveling in the pain it produced. Physical discomforts we imagine hell inflicting upon us pale in comparison to the torture of soul pain. Loss of a loved one comes closest. That piercing, emotional damage resulting from trauma. When it became clear my time had not yet expired on Earth, and I was to return, I was told not to reveal their existence to the rest of my kind. My reward, they communicated to me, would be a marginally improved station among the slave population. Alternatively, if I managed to convince others of their existence, new horrors would await me when I returned. I can't imagine anything worse than what I experienced, subsumed beneath an ineffable grief and torment. For weeks I tried to explain to anyone who would listen what I experienced. Everyone told me I'd suffered a very serious and traumatic experience for a young man, that the event left scars on my psyche as well as my heart. I gave up trying to convince them. I slowly began to convince myself that what they'd told me was true. I'd simply imagined it. A death dream, as it were. The mind reckoning with its own imminent demise, trying to make sense of the experience. Then I met someone who claimed to have met God. This was a few years later when the author of a non-fiction book recounting their near-death experience visited my hometown. I won't reveal the author's name as I don't want to invite a lawsuit, which I'm sure he'd launch against me if he read that I'd besmirched him. I attended a reading and afterward confronted him about his tale. I looked him in the eye and asked if he really met God, something I'm sure he's dealt with hundreds of times. He smiled and nodded, assuring me that yes, God is real and is filled with love. On a lark, I decided to tell him that I knew the truth, that slavery awaits us all. A flicker in his gaze betrayed his knowledge of the fact. He really had died and visited the afterlife, but lied about it in his book. Because he knew the truth of heaven, the horrible place our souls are bound for. The first time I worked the Christmas Eve night shift at my local rundown gas station wasn't by choice. Despite my general contempt for this holiday, having my manager upend my big plans to just sulk alone in my room irritated me immensely. I couldn't quit either. This job is helping me pay for college. Granted, a backroads gas station on Christmas Eve isn't exactly booming with customers and provides about as much solitude as my room, but disrupting that tradition left me in a foul mood. Now, 4 years later, scheduling myself for Christmas Eve, or trading shifts with someone if I must, has become my new tradition. I only feel compelled to write this down because this will be the last Christmas I'll be surrounded by cheap liquor, cigarettes, and boner pills. I'll be done with my civil engineering degree and leaving this town. As strange as it sounds, working this particular shift at this particularly dull, soul-sucking place will be what I miss most. I won't recount all the Christmas Eves I've spent working the counter, but I'll tell you about this final one, and I think you'll understand why I observe this tradition. I settled in behind the counter and took a seat on the ancient stool, just waiting to become a workman's comp case at any moment. The afternoon shift guy, Andy, hadn't even waited for me to get in at 10. Instead, he had left a note to get me up to speed on things in the store. "Hey man, got a party I gotta get to, shitter's clogged." I glanced in the direction of the closet that barely passed for a bathroom, and saw the trickle of water that was starting to escape from under the door. Merry Christmas to me. I played back the store's tapes, and saw Andy make his exit at 9:40 with a couple of tall cans of Bud Light poorly hidden under his jacket. I skimmed ahead through the tapes, and thankfully no one else came in to have their way with an unattended store. I glanced at the time, 15 after, and then to the rapidly growing puddle at the other end of the store. I had enough time. I'll spare you the details of my battle with that porcelain monster. But I had worked up a mean sweat when I heard the bell attached to the front door jingle. My heart shot up into my throat. I thought I had lost track of time. I ripped my gloves off and rushed to get back to the counter. I slammed the door open, startling the homeless man that was fishing for change out of his coat in front of the counter. Maybe it was the panicked look on my face, but the man didn't say anything, just stared slack-jawed and pointed to some cigarettes behind the counter. I wiped my brow and made my way to the register. "Could I, get some Camels?" mumbled the man. I grabbed the cancer sticks and placed them on the counter. 8175, please. The man plunged his hands into the apparently endless pockets hidden within his coat, and occasionally fished out a dime or a nickel. I glanced back up to the clock. 11:04. Shit. I only had 3 minutes. "It's fine, man. Just take them," I said as I pushed the pack towards him and brushed the pile of change into my hand. "Oh shit, really? Yay, Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas to you too, God bless," said the man as he pocketed the pack and walked back out into the night. I sighed deeply and straightened my shirt. The clock ticked painfully slow. 11:05 became 11:06, which finally became 11:07. I swallowed deeply as the headlights materialized from the shadows outside the door. Right on time as always. The whole reason I made sure to work this particular shift was for this customer. I watched as the figure stepped out of the same station wagon as always and hustled to the front door to get out of the cold. "Merry Christmas, pal," said the man as he strode into the store, rubbing his hands together, trying to get back some warmth. He wore the same jacket as always, the same Santa hat. Even the aftershave that wafted behind him was the same. As routine as this had become, I couldn't bring myself to say anything. I could only nod absently. He did the same circuit around the store that I knew by heart at this point. He finally located what he had come in for and brought it to the counter. An 8-pack of AA batteries. "Every year I tell myself to get the batteries for my kids' presents when I buy them, but every year I forget," chuckled the man. "It could have waited till the morning," I replied, but the man paid no mind. "What do I owe you?" he asked as he slipped a wallet from his pocket. No, it never mattered what I said. This routine was set, and all I could do was play along by selling him those damn batteries. $12, I mumbled. "Geez, that much? Well, I guess that's the convenience fee for ya." He handed over a $20 bill. As I popped open the cash drawer, the man waved his hand dismissively. "Don't worry about it, you have a Merry Christmas." He flashed a smile and then strode out of the store with a wave. I let out a shuddering breath. I hated what came next, but there was nothing I could do to change this either. I looked outside and the station wagon was gone without a sound, like it was never there. Right on cue, another light emerged from the darkness. Just one this time. As it got closer, I could see the same station wagon approach the store again. Well, same, except that it looked like the station wagon had just rolled in from the wrecking yard. The driver's side headlight was gone, and the rest of that side was brutally smashed in. I'd guess even the frame of the car itself was bent. When the driver's door groaned opened, I brought my eyes down. I could never stand this part. The front door swung open again, but the scent that wafted in wasn't aftershave. It was gasoline and something metallic. From the edge of my vision, I could see a figure shambling past the counter on shattered legs that couldn't possibly have supported his broken frame. He choked out the same sentence as before, but every tortured syllable was forced out with horrible effort. "Merry Christmas, pal." The tears started rolling and fell onto the grimy counter. I wiped my eyes with my sleeve, and when I could see again, the figure had returned to the counter. He set the same 8-pack of batteries on the counter, bringing his hand into my line of sight. I don't know how a hand so twisted and broken could hold anything, but it set the batteries in the exact same spot. He made the same comment before asking the price, and I told him. He choked out the same comments about the price and handed me a blood-streaked $20 bill. Trembling, I grabbed the bill and winced as he choked out for me to keep the change. He shambled out into night, waving with a mangled arm. The tears had turned into deep, shuddering sobs now. I took some deep breaths and found some semblance of composure again. We weren't done yet. I looked outside and the smashed station was gone as expected. No car emerged from the dark this time. Just a figure that silhouette became more and more defined as it drew closer to the gas station. The door swung in and a withered husk of a body shuffled into the store. The rotting suit that draped him may have fit at one time, but it seemed to be swallowing him now. The voice he spoke with now was beyond hoarse, as if the words were forced through countless layers of sandpaper. They were nearly unintelligible. I gathered myself as the corpse shambled that familiar circuit through the store. This was my last chance to say what I needed to, what I was too scared to say for the last 4 years. I was so afraid I'd break whatever spell or magic or voodoo that made all this possible. However, I knew I couldn't keep living in the past. The corpse, wearing the suit we buried him in 10 years ago, approached the counter and set down the batteries with a desiccated hand. He rasped out the same question as before, but I didn't play my part this time. "Why didn't you wait to go in the morning, Dad?" The corpse paid no mind to me and coughed out the same comment about the cost of convenience as he started to hand me a practically disintegrated $20 bill. "Fuck. We needed you, Dad." I fought through the sobs that were shaking me to my core. "I miss you so much." The corpse said nothing, still waiting for me to take the bill from his hand. But I can't put myself through this anymore. I wiped the tears away and stood up taller. I'm going to build roads, safer ones so other kids don't lose their dads to assholes who don't even stop after hitting someone. My father kept staring sightlessly at the bill I refused to take from his hand. "I have to let you go, Dad." I closed my eyes, trying to hold back the tears. When I opened my eyes again, the corpse was nowhere to be seen. It was just him. My dad as he was that Christmas Eve. Santa hat and everything. He looked me right in my eyes, and a small grin turned up the corners of his mouth. "Merry Christmas, son." I fumbled for words, but none came to me. I could only stare. As I cleared my throat to try to speak, I heard the bell on the door ring. I snapped my head toward the door and saw the homeless man from earlier step into the store timidly, almost with reverence. I turned back to where my dad was standing. He was gone, the only thing out of place being a pack of batteries on the counter. "Hey, I saw you crying from out there." He gestured vaguely toward the parking lot. "Are you okay, pal?" "Yeah, I think I am." I'd never been a believer in the occult. The idea that all it takes to change your life was a few pentagrams sounded like a campfire story to keep the kids awake at night. It wasn't until years of bills piling up and my wife screaming at me every night about how I don't do enough to keep us afloat that the idea stopped seeming so ridiculous. To be honest with you, my life was truly a mess. My marriage was falling apart, and I was working a dead-end back office job that I hated, so, long story short, I was miserable at work and miserable at home. In fact, I couldn't even remember the last time I'd smiled, and I wasn't entirely sure I still knew how. It was a cold Friday morning, and the snow fell heavily outside my window as I got ready for work. I sprayed a thick cloud of deodorant on the suit I'd been wearing all week, all the while looking at my wife who lay in bed facing the opposite side of the room. I knew she was awake, but this was no longer the type of marriage where good mornings and kisses goodbye were exchanged. Truthfully, the only reason we were still together was for the sake of our daughter, Jane. Jane was a quiet kid. She never made a fuss or caused problems at home, and for some reason that rubbed me the wrong way. She seemed to live a carefree life, oblivious to the hell I was living, and I hated her for that. Why did she get to be happy when I was just one bad day away from putting a Remington 1911 in my mouth and meeting God? I left the house and trudged through the snow on my way to the train station, and with each step I got more and more tired with my life. Just then I passed a convenience store with a big sign that said, $5 million scratch card bonanza. 10 lucky winners to be selected. Wouldn't it be fun to win that? I thought with a self-deprecating laugh, knowing I'd never been that lucky in my life. As I kept walking, I passed a shop that I'd never seen before. The window read, "Idle Hands," with a picture of Baphomet under it. For some reason, something compelled me to enter. Hey, why not? I was early for work anyway. So I went in. The shop smelt of incense as a thin plume of smoke rose from a burning stick in the corner. A grungy-looking young woman with tattoos and piercings greeted me from behind a black wooden counter. "Welcome," she said sweetly. "Does any of this shit work?" I said. as I picked up a realistic-looking skull from a shelf. "If you want it bad enough," she retorted, sounding like someone who'd been asked this question 1,000,000 times. "Okay, I'll play along," I thought as I explained my situation to her, and I explained everything. My bitch wife, my daughter I hated. Everything. To be honest, I wasn't even looking for a solution, I just wanted to vent at this point. And she listened intently to my entire rant, simply replying, "Why don't you kill them?" "What?" I asked, disappointed by the realization that this woman was clearly as batshit as she looked. "Okay, I'm done here," I said, and as I turned to leave, she put a small, dainty hand on my shoulder and assured me that she was serious. She then explained what blood packs were, and how I could have anything I wanted if I was willing to pay the right price. "So, what do you want?" she asked me. "To win the lottery next door," I replied jokingly. She scribbled on a paper and says, "Go buy a ticket, but before you scratch it, say these words while thinking of your wife and child. Make sure you say the whole thing," she emphasized. "Whatever," I said as I walked out with the paper in my hand, fully intending to scrunch it up and go about my day. But when I stepped outside, something told me to try it. A little inkling that said it couldn't hurt to do just once. Soon enough, I found myself in the corner store. "One scratch card, please." The man behind the counter fished a card out from a box and handed it to me. It was leaf green with gold $signs on it. Well, at least their design team tried to be original, I thought as I began to recite the words given to me. "Infra pater da potestatem tuam mea voluntas, si tua liberalitas mea est." I said it in a voice that was just above a whisper, thinking about my wife and daughter as instructed, then proceeded to scratch the silver strip, revealing 2 simple words. "You win." I must have read that wrong. I turned the card over and back again, only to see the same words that I'd read moments before. "You win." I staggered backwards and showed the old man behind the counter my ticket. He took off his reading glasses in disbelief and immediately handed me a flyer with information on how to collect my prize. The instructions were simple enough. Call a number and inform them that you've won, and they will get back to you with a date to collect your check. Just like that, my life had changed. I was rich. After that, the days flew by, and I remembered it all through rose-colored glasses. I remembered how my boss screamed at me for being late, to which I grabbed my crotch and told him to suck it. I remember how my wife screamed at me for not paying the bills, unaware that I was now a millionaire. I remember cashing my check and realizing all of this was real. And I also remember the voices. With each day they became louder and louder, first appearing in dreams as nothing but a whisper, then as a deafening noise that screamed inside my head, yelling all sorts of threats and blasphemy. It told me that the death of my wife and child was a necessary measure if I wanted to avoid what would inevitably happen next. So I began to enact a plan, hopefully a good one. Contrary to popular belief, I wasn't stupid. I knew that a bad plan would mean jail time. It would mean not being able to enjoy the money that I'd possibly traded my soul for. So I spent weeks planning, making sure not to Google or search for any information that would lead to my crime. I've watched enough crime shows to know that's an easy way to become a suspect. And finally I reached a solid plan. I would place a curtain in a dustbin full of paper and drop a cigarette in there. No gasoline or paraffin, as I knew that firefighters can tell when an accelerant had been used. Once again, crime shows. I'd never been a smoker, but I figured this was an exception. And so, I waited till my wife got home, waited until they'd both gone to sleep, lit a large cigar, and thrown it in the bin. Soon enough, smoke began to plume from out of it, starting as a thin stream, eventually turning into a thick cloud of black smoke, and before long the curtain was alight. I ran downstairs, out of the house and into the garage where I lit a cigarette as my alibi, a married man that was trying to quit smoking, sneaking the occasional cigarette in the garage after everyone went to bed. Unbeknownst to him, the house was on fire, and before he could get inside, the blaze was too big. Foolproof. My wife and child died of smoke inhalation. Firefighters came, and then police got involved. There was a bit of suspicion given my recent lottery winnings, but they found no life insurance policies or signs of infidelity, so the case was ruled as an accident. I was scot-free, free to be rich in peace, and boy did I enjoy it. I pretended to grieve for a few months, and then bought a yacht in Cabo that I used to sail around South America, enjoying all that life had to offer. That was until this year. The voices were back, but this time they said something different, and one night as I began to fall asleep, I felt that same dainty hand on my shoulder, followed by a sweet voice saying, "Time's up."